Economic Recovery Committee to order at 1:01 p.m. on September 2nd. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Woodward.
Here.
Gershenson.
Here.
Biz.
Here.
Zach.
Here.
Jackson. Jackson. Lubes.
Here.
Miller. Nelson.
Here.
Cobb.
Here.
Did she respond?
Hello?
Oh, thank you.
So it's Commissioner Jackson.
Yeah, I'm on via phone. I couldn't
Oh,
hear you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Wypert.
All right.
I'm here.
And Kuhn.
Here.
And back to Miller.
Miller's signing on right now.
Okay, very good. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Excellent. Next up is the Pledge of Allegiance, and you can direct yourself either behind me or behind Commissioner Wypert. If you would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Next up, we have approval of the minutes from the August 10th, 2020 meeting. Is there a motion? Moved by Commissioner Spiz, seconded by Commissioner Nelson. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, Mr.
Opposed,
Chair,
say-
I'm sorry. Whoop, I'm sorry. I did have a question, but it's not on. Okay.
And not, you had a question on the minutes?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then we'll just think, we'll pause and we'll come back. Go ahead.
I approve of them, but I just had some technical questions. Okay.
All right, go ahead.
If someone were to mail you a letter, say accepting a position that you would, or use a letter naming people to a position, or a constituent sends in a letter, of some sort, and it's read into the minutes, is it then put in the minutes or is it just thrown in the trash?
I think you're being, if someone through the public comment portion.
Public comment portion, but also
Okay.
and anything, but also if they write something in, but also if you make an appointment to something or other, whatever that may be, okay? It's read in, your letter is read in session, whether it's a committee meeting or a
Yep.
Board of Commissioners meeting, but is
Yep.
that document then kept and put in the record as a permanent record?
Yes, I believe so. I believe when the clerk, and Sandy, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that all appointments and things that we receive that the clerk reads in under communications, those are received and are included in the minutes, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. Okay, so that's correct. Public comment, if they send in an email or speak during public comment, we take notes of that. I'm not seeing, I believe there was during public, public comment. I see under public comment here, Andrew Murphy from Troy spoke, and Carol Finkelstein, trustee of West Bloomfield School District, spoke, and also submitted an email for public comment to be read into the record. I don't see a copy of that here, but I believe staff has it, so we can, if you want to amend it to include that
Mr.
email
Chairman.
that was read.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
think I could maybe answer Commissioner Taub's question. So when we do the minutes, whether for committee or the board, we summarize people's comments. We don't take them down verbatim. And if something is submitted in writing for a packet, it is kept as part of the record that is kept for the record retention schedule. And we keep that in our files, but we don't keep it as part of the minutes of the meeting. And that's the procedure that we follow.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Todd. All right, no further questions. Let's go back. It was moved by Commissioner Spiz, seconded by Commissioner Nelson to approve the minutes. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Let the record reflect that the minutes from August 10th are received unanimously. That brings us to approval of the agenda. And if I may, when I reorganize some of these things, because I know that we have a time constraint, Mr. Carlson's, I think Hillary's listed down as the reimbursement of eligible expenses, but I believe Sean was point on that for item 1. So keep item 1, but if people don't object, we'll move items 4 and 5, which should be very quick, that are partially related to item 1 right after that, and then do items 2 and 3 as 4 and 5. So basically moving 4 and 5 right after 1, so we can get through with Mr. Carlson as quickly as possible. Commissioner Whitefield?
I make a motion to amend the agenda as recommended.
Moved by Commissioner Whiteford, seconded by Commissioner Nelson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the agenda that way, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Opposed, say nay. Let the record reflect that the agenda is approved as amended unanimously. And that brings us to public comment. So let's, is Andrea on?
Yes,
Hi, Andrew.
I'm here.
Is there anyone on the phone for public comment or any submission for public comment?
Currently, your public comment lines are open and there are no callers and there are no online submissions today.
Okay. Seeing no public comment, I'll declare public comment closed. And that will move us, thank you, Andrea. That will move us to communications.
Okay.
And so we have the one item, county executive COVID-19 update, that slide deck. I get a motion to receive and file the communications. Moved by Commissioner Lubes, seconded by Commissioner Zach. Is there any discussion? I also emailed out to all the committee members basically the same information. Commissioner Spiz and I requested an Excel document that if there's no objection, I'd like to just add to this as part of the receiving communications that details all the resolutions, all the appropriations of the COVID CARES dollars, and also addresses the items that are on today's agenda as pending propositions of the full allocation of the $219 million. I know that Mr.
That.
Carlson, say again?
I would support that. So I would just expand on it, stating the attachment dated 8/31/2020 version 2 from Mr. Carlson.
Got it. Okay. So moved by to amend, accepted, moved by Commissioner Spiz, seconded by Commissioner Weifert, to amend the communication to include the document that circulated around to everyone that was submitted by Mr. Carlson, which again summarizes the stuff that's in this slide deck. Is there any questions on any of the information? I know that Mr. Carlson's on the line and happy to answer those. Commissioner Taub.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I generally get my packet on both this contraption that we're working with, plus my personal email. I don't have a copy of that, so I don't even know what you're talking about. It may be online, but I don't have it in my personal email, so I can't access my other iPad. So I'd appreciate it if someone could send it to me. Thank you.
So are you talking about the Excel document that summarizes all the same information that's in the packet? So there's the county executive COVID-19 update that's on the communications. That slide
I
deck.
understand it, but I'm just talking in general. You're making an amendment or changing something. I can't even find it because I don't have a copy of
It was
that.
sent, I mean, Commission,
It was sent at 10:39 a.m., Shelley, and it was to your personal account.
Well, it's not here, so somebody send it again.
We'll
Might be
send
stuck
it
in a
staff.
firewall somewhere.
Yeah,
It's not
Biz
here.
or staff can for it. All it is, it's an Excel document of basically all the stuff that's in the slide deck that, basically identifies the resolution that we adopted, what was allocated, you see the full tally, and it also, some of the resolutions that are new appropriations on today's agenda are reflected in there. Altogether, it comes to the $219 million. But we will make sure that you get a copy of that.
I just sent it again from me.
Thank you, Commissioner Spiz. Is there any questions for Sean on any of that? Obviously, the things that have not been approved yet by the board that we'll be discussing today, we'll be talking about those items individually, but is there any additional information questions that folks have for Mr. Carlson? Okay, seeing none. All in favor of approving the amendment, which was to add that Excel document to communication, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that the record reflected that was approved unanimously. And then a final vote on approval of the communications, the county executive COVID-19 update with the amendment that we just adopted. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Let the record reflect that the communications were received unanimously. Okay, that brings us to the regular agenda. First item, Board of Commissioners approval of the Open Together County COVID-19 Pandemic Response Plan and reimbursement of eligible expenses from coronavirus relief grant funds. Need a motion, or moved by Commissioner Spiz, seconded by Commissioner Zach. I think we have presenter listed as Hillary, but I think Sean is teed up to explain this. And then, I think Hillary is on. She can add to it. Mr. Carlson, can you walk us through what this is? It's a pretty hefty appropriation, but I think it makes sense given that our past practice has been when there's grant funds available to reimburse us for eligible costs, that we do so. And this is in fact the formal action of moving CARES dollars to reimburse our expenditures as it relates to our COVID response and economic recovery. Mr. Carlson.
Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity, and Hillary's on, and so she can jump in as well. And I believe Lynn might be on as well on the call. But the main crux of this is we have leaned in, Oakland County, the Board of Commissioners, the County Executive's Office, on this pandemic early on. We did not wait for CARES Act. As you all recall, back in April, actually in March, we started passing appropriations in order to respond to COVID-19. There were, I believe, 4 different resolutions that were passed in March, and then subsequently another 3 in April. And all of those, we had leaned in, we as the county, and we used our own fund balance in order to take care of our residents, our citizens, and our county employees in regards to responding for county operations and our community. So part of this resolution is to reimburse our fund balances for those appropriations that were made. So that is recognizing the CARES Act revenue formally in this resolution. So that accounts for $40.3 million. So that's what part of this resolution is for. The other portion is we have departmental costs that have been incurred, that have been appropriated through the department budgets, but they are CARES Act eligible, and that accounts for $20 million, $20.3 million. And so we're asking for that formal recognition of the CARES Act revenue to make sure that we're reimbursing our accounts for those eligible expenses. And then the last main bucket has to do with $27.5 million that has to do with going from August 1st to December 30th. And that has to do with aligning with the CARES Act. As you all know, at this point in time, the $219 million needs to be expended by the end of December. So that $27 million has to do with the run rate and taking care of other county operations, whether that be testing, whether that be vaccinations, whether that be additional PPE, and supporting our communities. So that's what that $27 million is. So there's basically 3 prongs to this resolution. The reimbursement of our fund balances for COVID-19 expenditures that we leaned in on early on, $20.3 million for our departmental expenses that have happened since March through July 31st, and then expenditures that will be incurred in regards to making sure that our county operations are safe. And that is from August 1st to December 30th. So that's a kind of a summarization of the resolution without getting into all of the details.
And the resolution details every resolution that we appropriated funds, that we are putting funds back for. The other thing I will say that there is a provision for the last bucket that Mr. Carlson was talking about, setting up an oversight committee. Like I said, whether it's testing or a series of other things, expenditures over $50,000 will require approval of that oversight committee to be spent between now, or those expenses that occurred from the beginning of this month through the period of time in which these funds have to be expended by. Commissioner Spiz, then Commissioner Tom.
Yeah, just a quick question on the oversight committee. I'm a little bit confused on why we would need an oversight committee for this resolution. I understand the other ones that are coming, but this is all relative to county monies that, one, have been spent, or two, are allocated to be spent before the end of the year, if I understand correctly, right? Or am I missing something on this one?
Right. Well, the last bucket that Mr. Carlson was talking to, the 27.5 million.
Yeah.
It's expenditures of CARES Act funding to be utilized for eligible expenses. We don't know completely what all those expenses are. Obviously, it's bolstering up testing, we have the consultants that we've been working with that have been overseeing all that. Those things will all come due, and it's out of that pot those dollars would be expended. So from an oversight perspective, the oversight committee, the administration granted authority for requests under $50,000 to move things around to address the pandemic response. But this is the last, if you will, that's not expressly allocated to a specific thing.
Okay.
Expenditures over that will have the oversight of the bipartisan oversight committees that we have for these other types of general large appropriations.
Understand now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, thank you for the presentation and for the continuing work that you're doing so terrifically. But I have a question for, I guess, all of administration. I'm still hearing from staff people, not necessarily my staff, but just people in general that work at the county, that they are still using their own laptops or iPads or computers, that they are still paying for producing documents and paper. And I know that was not the intent of this funding, to let some people get home iPads or whatever, or notebooks, and others not having them. And the problem these people are facing is that now their children are back in school, and they don't have a multitude of iPads for the kids. They're back in school, but they're not physically back in school. So it presents a problem. I would like to make a second pass through the staff in Oakland County, people who work for Oakland County, and find out if in fact this is correct, if there are still people who are having to use their own ink and their own paper, their own printers, and their own notebooks.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Taub. Thank you for the question. I just sat down with Deputy County Executive April Lynch, with Mike Timms, our Director of IT, and the staff yesterday, and we had the exact conversation. April Lynch, who oversees HR operations among other operations, is putting out a survey in order to get an understanding of how many additional desktops. As way of an example, there are some employees who will just take fiscal services as way of an example that might be working, or it could be any department for that matter, might be using, we've given them a MyPC license so that they could use their computer. If they don't have a laptop and they had a desktop at home, some of them are using their laptop and desktops, their home computers, using our MyPC license in order to get on the network and do what they need to do. But we are sensitive to this, and we talked and asked Mike Tim to put a plan together. In April, we'll be sending out a survey to understand how many additional laptops that we need to provide. So we would utilize some of that 27 million that we were talking about in that resolution to do just that is get desktops for those employees that are working from home and doing critical work for the county. So thank you for the question, and it is being addressed, and it will be further addressed with the passing of this resolution.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Taub. Commissioner Zach had her hand up.
Pass.
Okay, pass. Any further discussion on this resolution? Commissioner Wiper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Sean, Phil Wiper, and just so the world that's watching us, the resolutions cover it, but you've had to go through the Treasury regulations and the guidance from Treasury, and it's in the resolutions, but how big of an ordeal was it getting the guidance for all these approvals to make sure that everything is properly expended? Can you just give us a little summary?
Oh, well, we work with Pierce Monroe and Associates and their close partner, Guidehouse. Guidehouse is actually part of, they are on a Tiger team with the U.S. Department of Treasury, so they have some insights in regards to guidance. They're providing, I was on a call the other day with Guidehouse and all of their other clients that they have across the country, including our neighbors to the south, Wayne County, but also on the call was Miami-Dade, Cook County out of Chicago, some counties down in Texas, both the county that represents Dallas as well as Houston. Our guidance is that we have a process and we're in close contact with them on every one of these resolutions. We have them take a look and advise us and make sure that we've got the appropriate language in the resolution in order to make sure that it is eligible. So some of this is new too, but we believe and have a high confidence level that all of these expenditures are eligible, and we continue to also seek reimbursement on other things like FEMA as well, but we don't expect a quick turnaround on the FEMA stuff. But I don't want to say it's that labor intensive. We've got a great team, and they respond to our needs fairly quickly.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you were talking to other counties. These are other counties that are in a similar situation to Oakland County, where we actually received, because of our population of having more than 500,000 people. So a lot of, like in our state, there's only a few counties that were administrators of COVID money. So I do appreciate you seeking out other counties and other governments to see what they're doing too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other further questions on this resolution? I know it's kind of a big dollar amount, but in the larger 2/3 of it is like putting back the money that we use to actually do the response, and then designating that last bit of money to help support the response and recovery from now until the end of the year. Seeing no further, Commissioner Wiper.
Sorry, you just made me think of one more thing. I hate to do this afterthought, but Sean, in your conversations with those other governments around the country,
yes.
Did you hear that Oakland County was in a better position to have been able to address the pandemic right away with fund balance that we had?
Yeah, that was one of the takeaways. There are some counties that are still sitting on their money waiting to see if there could be revenue replacement. But of the counties that were on that call, we were the one that had leaned in, I think, the most aggressively to take care of the situation. So others have certainly come along, and there's some innovative things that some of the others are doing as well. But in regards to the amount of appropriations that took place early on by us, some have caught up in the month of June, end of May, and so forth. And some have a lot more money than us. Cook County had like $450 million that they because of their population and size. But it did sound like of those counties that were on the call that we had leaned in most aggressively in the early months of the pandemic.
It's good to hear. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further discussion on this resolution, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Gershenson,
Yes.
Biz,
Yes.
Zach,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Lubes,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Taub,
Yes.
Wypert,
Yes.
Kuhn,
Yes.
Woodward,
Yes.
11-0.
Fantastic. A sufficient number voting in the affirmative, the resolution is recommended to the board. Let's go now on the printed agenda in front. We're going to jump to item 4. We've got Mr. Carlson here. This is Board of Commissioners Amendment to Miscellaneous Resolution 20162, Oakland County's COVID-19 Veterans Relief Program, expansion of eligibility of CARES Act funding to serve as veteran population in Oakland County. Moved by Commissioner Lube, seconded by Commissioner Wypert. Mr. Carlson, can you explain what this does?
Yes. So right now we have a grant program for our veterans across Oakland County. We need to get a bigger push on that, but part of that grant funding right now is for our individual veterans, whether that be for utility costs, mortgages, food expenses, and so forth. So we are going through that process. $743,000 was allocated in regards to CARES Act funding. That, like I said, the 264 was from state funding, and the 700 plus was from CARES Act. What we would like to do with a portion of that CARES Act is to help our American Legion and our VFWs. We have 31 listed, although active American Legions and VFWs across Oakland County is 28. So we would like to support those operations. We'd like to use a portion of that funding to provide $10,000 to $20,000 grants to support those important organizations in our community.
Any discussion? Commissioner Taub, followed by Commissioner Spiz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The word veterans, do you mean all people who served in service, or those who were only on active duty in combat areas? Sean, can you help a little bit with that, please?
Yeah, so veterans is anybody who served in the military, whether you served for 2 years or whether you served for 22 years and retired as a veteran. You are considered to be a veteran, whether it was active duty or whether it was National Guard or the reserves. So all of them would qualify, and that's 60,000 plus veterans that we have in the county at this point in time. Of course, our veteran population is dramatically reducing. We have very few World War II vets and starting to lose some of our Korean vets, but veteran applies to if you were honorably discharged, you are considered to be a veteran, according to your DD 214 form.
May I follow up?
Sure.
You mentioned veterans organizations such as, so if another organization other than the VFW and the American Legion would happen to apply for the grant, would that be acceptable?
I apologize, Commissioner Taub, you broke up in the beginning. You were asking whether the VFW or American Legion grants would be eligible. I missed the first part.
No, she was. Go ahead.
There are other organizations. I know there's a Jewish War Veterans Organization in Oakland County. would they also be eligible?
I don't see why not. I mean, if they're representing veterans and that those are the organizations that we're looking to support. So I don't know why we would exclude them.
Okay, because you do have such as, which implies that there could be others in the resolution. I just wanted to be sure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would open up to anybody who is are supporting our veteran community. So.
I mean, I think it's important, and it goes without saying, and it's of all these CARES dollars, they have to meet eligibility. Some of these, like the VFW, American Legion, they are facilities that have been closed. They have operating expenses that's been directly impacted because of COVID. Whatever application for a grant would have to meet appropriate CARES eligibility and signed off by our consultants to make certain that it is a eligible use of these dollars. I think Commissioner Spiz had his hand up as well. Commissioner Spiz.
Yes, just to build on what Commissioner Cobb mentioned. Do we have a oversight committee for this grant? I don't remember if we did or not. I don't think we did.
We don't.
All right. So my question is, how are we going to determine which organization gets allocation and how much? I think it's a great idea, by the way, but I'm just wondering.
We would use a similar process like we've done with the local Chamber of Commerce. I mean, we could create an oversight committee, or we could refer it to the Recovery Grant Committee. The process is similar that we did, that we are doing with the local Chamber of Commerce. So whatever makes sense to the Board of Commissioners, I'm not opposed at all to using an oversight committee for the evaluation process of these grants.
Okay, great. I would recommend that, Mr. Chair, if we could do that, because I'd like to actually call all the organizations within my district and let them know how to apply when it's up and ready, so I can walk them through it. So if we did have some type of oversight, I think that would help.
Okay, well, I think that sounds like a motion from Commissioner Spiz to add the standard oversight language for the veteran fund that we do. That would be a member from the majority and an alternate member from the minority and the alternate, and a member of the administration to help oversee this. I think that's, probably appropriate move by Commissioner Spiz, seconded by Commissioner Weipert. Any discussion on that? All in favor of approving that amendment? But we didn't write it out, but I think everyone knows what the language is. It's the same language that we have in all of these. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Let the record reflect that the amendment was adopted unanimously.
Thank you,
So,
Mr. Chair.
Sandy, and that brings us to the main motion. Sandy, staff, can you make sure that Sandy has what that actual amendment would spell out? It's the same stuff in the. Okay, good. All right. So for the minutes moving approval, I think we all know exactly what we did, even though we don't have it written out in front of us. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's also important to realize that the lion's share of this money is still going to go as individual grants, and our veteran affairs team has an application out. I encourage all commissioners and actually, if I could have staff just send the link again to all commissioners to push out to their networks, social media, encouraging veterans to apply, qualifying veterans to apply. I think it would be good to make certain that we've got a good applicant pool for the individual dollars for these funds. That would be good as well. Commissioner Kuhn. Oh, you're muted up there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing that Sean mentioned is he might want to utilize an existing committee, and that's just an issue that for the administration. It might be easier from his perspective, instead of having yet another meeting, to just roll it into an existing meeting. And I just throw that out since Mr. Carlson raised that issue.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Kuhn. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the resolution.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Spiz,
Yes.
Dak,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Lubes,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Cobb,
Yes.
Whitebird,
Yes.
Kuhn,
Yes.
Woodward,
Yes.
Gershenson.
Yes.
Passes 11-0.
Sufficient number voting in the affirmative. The resolution passes and will be recommended to the board. This brings us to the next item, which is item 5 on the originally printed agenda. This is Board of Commissioners approval of reallocation of coronavirus relief grant funds from the Oakland County Small Business Stabilization Fund to the Oakland Together Small Business Recovery Grant Program. Moved by Commissioner Zach, seconded by Commissioner Lubes. Deputy Executive Carlson, can you give us a very quick summary of what this is?
Yeah, so what this portion is we have the Saving Business, Saving Lives grant. Originally, we had $700,000 that was put in there. That was one of the very first resolutions that we passed back in March of this past year when we allocated $1.85 million and matched some of the MEDC funding of 1.15, and we allocated 700,000 of that 1.85 to the Saving Business, Saving Lives grant, which was looking for manufacturing companies in Oakland County that were producing PPE. We had, then when we passed the small business stabilization of $12 million, we had allocated another $300,000 to this Saving Business, Saving Lives grant. We have went through the process and we have some remaining funds, 114. We've already moved some of the other funds from the small business stabilization awardees who never came forward. We've moved those over to the recovery grant. So this is our way of just trying to make sure that we're keeping track of all of these grants, zeroing out any remaining funds, putting them over in the recovery fund, which is still open and available to businesses through September 14th, and utilizing those dollars. So that's the purpose of this amendment that would allow us to close down the small business stabilization grant officially, take the remaining funds and put them over in the recovery grant funds and allocate those to businesses. And that application process, grant process, is still open until September 14th.
Right. Any other question? And this is, I think, when we move the unclaimed award of money, I think at our last board meeting, we overlooked this piece. So this now closes out the stabilization fund. Everything's over the recovery grant, and people can still be applying for the recovery grants, as Sean said, September 14th. Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you. Commissioner Zach,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Lubes,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Cobb,
Yes.
Whitebird,
Yes.
Kuhn,
Yes.
Woodward,
Yes.
Gershenson,
Yes.
Biz.
Yes.
Recommendation passes 11-0.
Sufficient number voting in the affirmative, it will be recommended to the board, and this begins closing out of the stabilization fund, and I kind of put a pin in it and keep moving forward with the recovery. Thank you, Mr. Carlson. You are free to go.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. All right. Okay, this brings us back, and this is the items 2 on the original agenda. This is a Board of Commissioners to establish the Oakland County Cultural Institution COVID-19 Support Fund and appropriation of CARES Act grant coronavirus relief funds. The moved by Commissioner Zach, seconded by Commissioner Lubes. And I believe we've got Chief Deputy Hillary Chambers on, and Hillary can speak to us. Hillary, there? Is she on? I don't see Hillary.
Try to reach her.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. This is, a number of commissioners have brought this up in some context. I think there's been another oversight committee that had a conversation about this as well. This would be allocating $2 million in small grants to these arts and cultural institutions. A lot of them rely on admission revenue and other events and things that have just been not possible in the wake of during the pandemic. And for them to be able to keep the lights on, pay the rent of a facility or what have you. They are an eligible expense. This resolution has been reviewed by our consultants, and that we would set up the Oakland County Cultural Institution Oversight Group to review applications, make grant awards, and up to $2 million here. And I think there are a number of organizations in our respective communities that we know that would be eligible for, that could definitely use this in the wake of COVID. Commissioner Zach, and then Commissioner Tao.
The one question that I had, could, let's say, there's little theaters like the Ringwald Theater in Ferndale, for example. And so they're a cultural institution, but they're also a small business. Are they eligible to apply for both grants, or are they precluded from it? I was a little bit confused about intent.
So I would say, and I shouldn't have let Carlson go. So if you're a small business, you're definitely eligible for the recovery grants. I can speak to the recovery grants that there is an intentional effort to be equitable and distributed to as many and fairly to everyone across the entire county, using those regional proportion of the 12 regional proportions when we started the stabilization fund. I think this committee has an obligation, if it is a for-profit business that falls into the kind of cultural space, to part of the application to ask, like, are you getting any other Oakland County grant awardees, and then take that in consideration in awarding any of these funds. I don't know if there's a, and if you got a $5,000 stabilization grant, for instance, back in the day, that take that in consideration. Maybe we would give you 15,000. Here's another 10. I think that let the oversight committee.
Oh, you could do both.
Yeah. There's no reason that you wouldn't be excluded, but I think they're for the oversight committee to make sure that in the application, have you gotten any Oakland County CARES dollars previously to inform decisions? It would be an appropriate thing. And we ask those questions on a lot of the other applications. Commissioner Taub, then Commissioner Gershenson.
Thank you. Couple things. First of all, I don't think they can apply twice for the same expenditures, obviously. So that goes without saying. The other thing is, I have some concerns because we don't mention the word artists. And is this only for museums or orchestras? What about the individual artist who can no longer have a show? What about all of the art shows that we have in this county practically every weekend during the spring, summer, and fall? I have concerns about them. You may call them an institution, but I have concerns about the individual artist. So I would like to add something that says cultural institutions and artists. There are plenty of artists whose incomes have been totally cut because what do? They give piano lessons, or they give ballet lessons, or they give flute or violin or trumpet lessons. They're not an institution. They're individuals who have no income coming in because they're not teaching children or adults, whatever, piano lessons and so on. So I'd like to amend this to include cultural institutions and artists in the title, as well as the now therefore be it resolved.
Okay, it's a motion by Commissioner Taub. Is there a second?
I want to input something. This is
Commissioner Jackson. Yeah, I'll calling you a second. It's been seconded by Commissioner Zach. Commissioner Jackson, I hear you. So, you have questions about this amendment?
Yes, just because I just need clarification because we're involved in partnering with the Art Beats and each assistance to the artists through the CARES Act already. So I don't know if we're ignoring the artists or if we want to amend this to offer more assistance. I just want to bring that to the attention of the board.
Yeah.
or the committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. I mean, to that point, I think I hear, and I completely agree with what Commissioner Taub's general sentiment is. We do have a direct assistance program, and as you mentioned, I mean, the committee met is matching dollars to help support, in this case, some musicians that 50% of their income has been impacted during COVID. And I think Commissioner Taub is talking similarly. How do we help support? Maybe as the individual artists, I mean, they can't have their art shows because they've all been canceled. The only thing I would say, there's two things that I think we've got to wrestle with. One, like, so if you are someone who gives piano lessons and things like that, then you probably have a business structure and you would be eligible to apply to the Small Business Recovery Grant because your business has been impacted by COVID because you can't go around. You could be able to do that. The making individuals applying to this is a administrative task. We discovered that with, even that other grant that was awarded, the documentation that's required to be able to get on an individual on W-2s and like how those, because so many of our grants are really structured in a reimbursement and or demonstration of lost revenue, which is an eligible thing. We've got to be able to get all the documentation to be able to do that, and then have to be able to have the system in place to administer. So, I'm not opposed to the amendment, but I would basically task the oversight committee to figure out how the mechanics and how to actually do it, because I think it's not as easy as identifying organizations to apply for a grant. That individual stuff it's a much more arduous task, and we've got to make sure that we have all the documentation and we've got the staff in place to be able to follow up with individuals. And in some cases, it's not. It's just different than a normal, like for instance, the Holocaust Museum. It's a much different application than an individual person where we are trying to get a grant to make up for lost income to an individual. Not that it can't be done. I think the oversight committee needs to figure out what's the appropriate process to make that happen. Commissioner Todd, you had your hand up, and that Commissioner Kuhn. Excuse me. After
Yes.
Follow
Yes.
up, and then Gershenson, then Kuhn.
Whoop, sorry, my phone went off at the same time. Yeah, I thank you for your consideration on the individuals, because the arts community is kind of ingrained together, if that makes sense to you. They kind of have their own groups of people with whom they speak. So my feeling is that as many people as we can touch with these CARE grants, while we can, we should. And I'm happy that we got some musicians and folks already with grants, but the more we can touch, I think the better off we are. And since the arts community, and I use that in a broad brush, but if you tell one arts group of artists, musicians or art or because the artists that make pictures or sculptors, if you tell one, it's going to be blasted all over the entire community. And we have money that can be used by them. So I appreciate the fact that we will give them the opportunity, a second quote unquote bite at the apple. Thank you.
No, I agree. Commissioner Gershenson, then Commissioner Kuhn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the way this whole thing evolved, it started with the money we were giving to the chambers. And I started to hear from some of our smaller museums wondering if they would qualify. Well, most of the museums, and I'm not 100% sure about this, are 501c3s. So 501c3s did not qualify for the business recovery grants. So that's one of the reasons that we felt it was necessary to address some of the museums specifically. So we have given money. We just did the musicians grant, and we've done the chambers, and also, Shelley, we have many people that have put on art shows. They qualified and have applied as
as the big one in West Bloomfield and received reimbursements because they were a small business. They were not a 501c3. So the people that are putting on art shows that have been canceled, they do qualify already under the small business loan. But the actual artists themselves, what I'd like to propose, and I'm certainly not against it, I just want to be sure that it fits all the criteria, is that maybe we could give this back to this question to staff, and maybe we could make this recommendation based on their understanding. If this group has not been dealt with, maybe we can make that tomorrow at the board meeting, we could make that amendment. I'm just not sure how that would play out within this $2 million to museums, whether we'd have to add some money to it, or whether it's being covered through some other program that we've already passed.
Thank you, Commissioner Gershenson. Commissioner, before Commissioner Kuhn, the one thing Commissioner Gershenson pointed out, she's correct. The recovery grant was for businesses. The Restart Michigan grants, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation grants, nonprofits were eligible to apply to that. And that was at 11.5 million. And there were some nonprofits that were in there. So it's like, not that they've been completely left off, but in terms of like the $30 big million that we applied was dedicated to business. Commissioner
Oh,
Kuhn.
absolutely, yeah.
Commissioner Kuhn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Part of the problem is this. You know, we received this resolution last night or 5 o'clock or whenever it was, and it's got different language in here. We don't have an administration person in here. For example, it talks about grants ranging from 10,000 to 50,000. I agree with Commissioner Taub that we should have this issue addressed, but I'm not sure it fits in this resolution. And I'm a little concerned about adding it without an administration, or at least looking at how it impacts the rest of the language of this resolution. Thank you.
Okay. Well, and Commissioner Zach, and then Commissioner Spiz.
Well, I seconded the amendment, and I think that there's been some really good points brought forward by Commissioner Gershenson and Commissioner Jackson that I didn't know that we had been funding artists in other ways. And I don't want this to be an administrative quagmire, so I would prefer to withdraw my second to the amendment, and it can be reintroduced tomorrow if there is, reason to do it. So I'm withdrawing my second. Forgive me, Commissioner Taub, but we need more information.
All right, so is there another second? Yeah, seconded by Commissioner Spiz. Okay, so I guess the one thing that I might encourage, Commissioner Taub, now Commissioner Spiz, we do have direct assistance support. We have that mechanism. I believe that Commissioner Taub and Commissioner Gershenson sit on, and others sit on that committee. Could you, is there a way to designate, I don't know, I think we approved originally $5 million for direct assistance, and maybe, another $500,000 to set up a program to do the direct assistance to artists out of that program. I think that might be a vehicle too, because that mechanism already exists. I think in that situation, the challenge would be is finding an administrator to go through it, because I think it is time consuming, paperwork consuming. With the one that for musicians, it was the burden's going to be borne by another entity to gather all the information before the dollars are released. Commissioner Taub?
Excuse me, yeah, what I'm trying to say is, or what I'm trying to do is, there are people who probably did not apply for any of our grants, whether they were a small business or a 501c3 small, whether they were artists or ran a little dance studio. If you're going to parcel this off into different groups, the word's still not going to get out. When you use the word art, artist, music, whatever you use, that's great. I did not know at all that we had a musicians group. This is news to me. and perhaps other people. That is, and so obviously, I don't know how many people applied for the grant, but if they didn't and they heard about it too late, again, we have the funding. I see no reason why, and if you want to wait a day or so until the administration looks into it, that's fine with me. But, and so I will withdraw, Commissioner Spiz, my motion, and I'll put it out there tomorrow, but I definitely feel that we owe it to people who haven't had a chance, maybe they were out of town, maybe they were sick with COVID, maybe they just didn't get the information, okay? If something could have happened, give them another chance, for goodness sake.
Okay.
Thank you,
Right.
Mr.
Thank you. So Commissioner Taub withdraws, Commissioner Spiz, you withdraw the second. And can talk, and I would encourage you to reach out to the administration, see if there's a way to work it here or work it through one of our available programs. But I mean, if you are a business, the recovery grant, the recovery up, and magically she appears. But we're almost done. Hillary. If you are a small business and you know of small businesses, and push it out there that people can still apply for up until I believe the 11th or the 14th for the recovery grants, people should definitely do that. Commissioner Spiz.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm looking for some clarification because multiple commissioners made this comment relative to monies for musicians. Can somebody please educate me and remind me, where did we apply grant money to musicians at? I don't recall doing that.
So
maybe it's mixed with something else that I didn't.
We approved direct assistance funding, like $5 million in total direct assistance. The oversight committee met and approved money that's being matched with private dollars to provide smaller grants to musicians that 50% of their income has been impacted as a result of COVID. Through a whole bunch of documents.
Which resolution was that again? I'm sorry.
Mike, I'm sorry.
Commissioner, Chief Deputy Hillary Chambers.
We talked about this on this is the emergency, the subcommittee, the oversight committee that you're on with Commissioners Taub and Jackson and Gershenson. So we talked about this last week. This is the $500,000 in a contract that we're giving to the Arts Beats and Eats Foundation. And then they're up to $500,000 that they're matching with money that they raised to give direct assistance to musicians who have been hard hit by the pandemic.
Okay, I missed that meeting. That's why I was not aware of it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Taub.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hillary, for clearing that up. That's what I thought it was, but we didn't go, it's going through Arts Beats and Eats. But every musician in the county does not participate in Arts Beats and Eats, obviously. Every artist does not participate. Every jewelry maker or weaver, they don't participate necessarily in Arts Beats and Eats. So we're using Arts Beats and Eats, obviously, to help us fund those people who cannot participate in the event this year, which is terrific. But we didn't go after individual musicians, the music teacher, the violin teacher, I don't know, whatever, okay? That's what I was concerned with. And that's kind of why I wanted to make sure that the resolution not only included institutions, our art museums, our orchestras, which would be considered an institution, quote unquote, but also artists. So that's, hence I put forth an amendment to change the title and change it now, therefore be it resolved to include and artists. But then I guess people wanted to wait and see if you found that to be difficult to administer. So
I do say, first off, in terms of the program that Arts Beats and Eats is going to administer, it's for Oakland County residents. A participation in the festival is not a requirement, but they will have to demonstrate that they've received more than 50% of their income from being a musician, and then they have to demonstrate what the business interruption impact has been from one year to the other year. So we need to have that documentation, for the CARES Act eligibility. So those would be the items that have to be available that Arts Beats and Eats have to have on the application. I do think though that it would be difficult, I think that all of you that serve on the oversight committees of some of these programs understand the challenge in terms of implementation. And I think what we were hoping in terms of the cultural institution funding is that we would run it more like the small business or the chamber grant, so that because it's business interruption, so that we could facilitate, 10, 20, 30, whatever the oversight committee decides on, grant allocations. It wouldn't have to be done on a reimbursement basis, or it wouldn't have to collect some of the receipts that we do for the other grant programs that we're running. So I do think that adding a component of emergency of the direct assistance would be difficult at this point. And I would encourage us to focus on the institutions that have suffered because they've been closed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the $2 million for the arts and culture grants.
Thank you. Commissioner Jackson?
Yes.
Boobs?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Cobb?
Yes.
Whiteford?
Yes.
Kuhn?
Yes.
Woodward?
Yes.
Gershenson?
Yes.
Biz?
Yes.
Zach?
Yes.
11-0.
Sufficient number voting in the affirmative. We recommend it to the full board. Thank you, everybody. And that brings us to the last item. I mean, we got one more thing after this is an update from health that left off this agenda, which we'll come back to. But we have the resolution that we've heard about in press, the Board of Commissioners establishment of the Oakland Together School COVID-19 Support Fund and appropriation of $28 million from CARES Act Corona Relief Funds to support our school, moved by Commissioner Nelson, seconded by Commissioner Taub. And we've got Hillary, Chief Deputy, if we have any question. This is pretty straightforward. Let me give a quick overview, and then if the Chief Deputy would like to weigh in. Spells out, obviously, we know that our schools are starting to open. Some in person, some in a hybrid model, some in a virtual state for the time being, and reassessing in the next couple months. Identify this will add $28 million on top of the $2 million that we've already allocated for the public health nurses to support our schools and safe reopening plans. It spells out a equitable school distribution formula, and then allows individual school districts to, it has an oversight committee with an application and sharing about how they addressing areas, how they're going to use these dollars. They're not obligated to use their dollars in any particular thing. They would spell out how they best use the dollars that they're eligible for to support our schools locally. And then there's one additional item here where that it allows for, this is I'm working with Oakland Schools, and I want to commend the commissioners that really are concerned and want to make certain that there's a way to help support the mental health of students, teachers, educators, parents, etc. To reserve up to $100,000 to support a mechanism of health screening referral services for our school-age children. So that's in the resolution as well. Any questions? I got Commissioner Spiz, Gershenson. I think I saw Commissioner Taub's hand too. Commissioner Spiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to see we modified the formula to put the special education students in there, because that was going to be one of my questions from the start. But I do notice it does say shall be based on that. So when we do the oversight committee, we don't want to give them any leeway in any way to add some potential adjustments to that. Because with shall, that means there's no adjustments at all. That's my read on that. So can we change that shall to a should? To allow some flexibility for the oversight committee.
Where is that, Mike?
The first be it further resolved. There's the distribution formula for the allocation of available funding at school districts and public schools. Academies shall or academies, I'm sorry, shall be based. Up near the bottom, right just above all the percentages, Marcia.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as it's currently spread, I mean, if people don't have it directly in front of them, 30% based on student population, 15% based on special education districts per district, 35% based on the number of economically disadvantaged students per district, 25% based on staffing per district. So do you want to change those numbers? I don't know.
No, I don't. I mean, my main point originally was going to be the special education, special needs, but that's in there, so that's good. But once we get that group into a committee and the oversight, and they start getting some of this information in, they're pretty much bound by those numbers. And there may be occasions where they want to deviate slightly for whatever reason. So I'm just wondering, do we want to be as stringent as a shall, or can we shift that shall to a should?
What's the will of the group?
I prefer a should. That allows the group a little more flexibility, but we don't know yet, per se.
Right. I mean, to Commissioner Spiz, I think the oversight committee has authority to make technical adjustments. So you don't think that encompasses?
I do not know.
Commissioner,
Can I ask you a question?
Commissioner Chamber, Deputy Executive.
Do you mean like potentially they would want to say 20% for this and 15 for that, like change the percentage? Is that what you're worried about?
Yeah, there might be as the stuff starts to come in, we might decide that we want to shift it based on all the information that comes in. Because I know in some of the other oversights, as information starts to come in, we see things that we did not think of, right? That do we want to shift the numbers for whatever reason?
I will just add though, just so everyone understands, this program would be run just like the CDT program, where they would have to submit to us eligible expenses. So it'd be done, primarily on a reimbursement basis, unless the oversight committee changes that. But that would allow us to get all the documentation for those categories of expenses that the resolution talks about.
I mean, it's kind of based on our discussions in the CVT, Hillary. That's kind of where I'm going off of, because I know we've got some information in over time that we have to reconsider, rediscuss, and reevaluate how we're going to do things. So I'm just looking for a little bit more flexibility. We can always come back to the board if we need to, but I would hope to avoid that.
I got Commissioner White. Commissioner White.
I think we should keep the shall, because, I mean, it is a resolution from our board, and we have to comply with the Treasury regulations, and they have to see when we're justifying that we did follow some pretty stringent guidelines. And so I don't think we should have total flexibility to say, hey, we're just going to pass out money as we deem fit later. So I think we should have some established firm guidelines. If something comes up different later, we can always readdress it as a board. But I don't think it should be loose right now.
Commissioner Gershenson.
Well, certainly there has been a lot of time and effort put into this, and I personally wanted to thank my colleagues, Kristen Nelson and Penny Lubes, who are in the mental health field, for helping us kind of craft this whole idea to include the mental health piece. And on the other committee that I sit on, when we have found that there's a need, we have been able to be flexible enough if the original wording of the resolution didn't include a group, or we see there's a bigger need in a specific group. But that task falls on Chief Chambers. So how do you feel about the shall or the more flexibility on those numbers? Should we keep it as it is and see how it goes, or give ourselves the flexibility now?
I think, as I understand it, the shall comes before the percentage for each of the 4 categories. And I do think that we have the right 4 categories, definitely. And the only question is when you run the numbers by school district, would you ever see anything where you wanted to change the percentage? But I mean, I think we've thought through what percentage by area. And I do think because, you know, the how you allocate the money per school district, no matter even, you know, we did leave the CVTs open, and we decided later to do it 80% on population and 20% on COVID impact after we saw things come in, and we did that as an oversight committee. But I do think, you know, if it's the will of the board to say these are the categories we like, and this is the percentage that we think everything should be weighted, it does provide a little bit of certainty to the school districts, and there won't be any, you know, there won't be any back and forth. There won't be any lobbying. There will be, this is the way that it is coming from the board. So I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. I think this is a solid formula. And when you look at the numbers, I think it makes sense. When you look at the varying school districts, I mean, the school districts with a lot of students, you know, are always going to get a little bit more money. But I think weighting it with the disadvantaged population and the special ed, I think is important. So I do think this is the right considerations and a good effort at the percentages. So I think that everyone will be satisfied with this, and it gives us a little bit of backstop in terms of this is just the formula. So everybody just has to, you know, move forward with the program.
Well, I also like the idea of the certainty of this. And I also know that all of our boards have been very flexible. When we find out we need to allocate more money to another area, we're able to do so. So I think it might be a good idea to just start with this and see where we go, especially knowing all the time and effort that went into this resolution.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Spitz for Secretary.
Yep, just my math might be off a little bit, but it doesn't add up to 100. Adds up to 105, so we need to adjust the numbers either way. So I'm not sure where we need to cut a 5% from. But my only other point while you guys take a look at that is I think someone mentioned earlier, there are some school districts that are opening up fully. There are some school districts that are doing the hybrid, and there's some that are doing 100% virtual. My concern is I don't know exactly how that affects each one of them from a costing perspective. And this, I agree with, in general, the basis of the format. But there might be something out there we don't know yet when some of the school districts start to actually get the kids in the school, online, going through these things. Is there anything that could be affected that we need to look at? That's my other concern. So I'd like to have that flexibility.
Well, to your Commissioner Top.
Thank you. As we all know, the word shall is mandatory. It's not will or may. But in legalese or in legislation, you put the word shall there, and that's the end of it. You shall do this, and that's it. There's no leeway either way. So school has already started, and we're trying to give this money, this funding out as soon as possible, I believe. Isn't that the intent? So I think if we can be a wee bit more flexible, not, even though it's what's the word? Coming back to the board can be cumbersome, okay? So I'd like to take the shell out and put may, the word may, or I don't know, figure something else out. So that no one can come back on us if we make a slight change and they say, you said shall. I'm just looking out for what we are saying in the word shall and what it actually means, primarily in legislation, but in law as well. So if coming back to the board could take a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, I don't know, depending on going to committee, changing this, that, or the other thing that might have to be changed slightly as we get into this. And since I'm listening to people say, well, some schools are in session, some schools aren't in session, some are halfway, some are full way. Let's just change the word to whatever gives us more flexibility and get on with it and get the money out to where it's needed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right. I get, the conversation. I think everyone here agrees that there's, We want to support our schools. I think it is important to have some certainty in a framework, and I commend Biz for catching like the math there, and I think that definitely needs to be corrected. But if we really want to get these dollars out quickly, we need to have a framework of what the allocation is per school district, because those school districts are going to submit applications based on what they're eligible for. And if we have it, I mean, if we allow for, I mean, like a lot of other different factors and changing these numbers, it's going to be that much harder for them to be able to submit their application for what they're allowed for. So, I mean, the shall, if for some reason there is something that comes up and everyone's like, we get ready for the final application that gets sent out, and we need to make an adjustment, this board has demonstrated its ability to come back and make those changes. But I think these are the right categories. The numbers are slightly off because of a math thing, and I would recommend decreasing like the total staffing per district down to 20% to make it a perfect 100. And we could do that. So I see Spiz like shaking his head. You agreement with that?
Yeah, I agree with that motion.
Okay, so Spiz will make the motion. Seconded by Wyford. Wait, is that second by Wyford? Yes. To change the 25 to 20% for staffing to make it a perfect 100, as it should be.
And before we vote, if I may, Mr. Chair, to comment on what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with the basic framework that's here. I do. And I think that's a good framework. I'm just concerned about something else coming up that we don't know about yet to be able to adjust. And if you feel we can get this board back together in a timely manner to make that happen, so be it. Versus, I know Hillary's done a great job with the CVT and getting us together, and we've been having a lot of great discussions on what we need to do, and it seems to be working. And we have that flexibility within that to make small adjustments. And that's all I'm looking for, small adjustments. I'm not looking to make a wholesale change into something in that general format. But with that, I won't comment on it again.
Okay, so we have a motion to change 25 to 20 for the staffing to have a perfect 100. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Okay. Motion passes, the amendment passes unanimously. Any further discussion? Commissioner Kuhn. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hillary, can I ask, have the allocation numbers actually been generated by the administration yet? You're muted.
You're muted.
I have looked at numbers that considered all of the factors except special education students. I'm still waiting for those numbers from the ISD. I also we're still waiting on the numbers and I do think on the public school academies, I'm still waiting on those numbers. So the first three factors though, I mean, was as you would expect it. Again, it's kind of like how we saw the CVT numbers. I mean, you know, you're not ever really going to get around the population and the size of a school district, which we have with the student population and also with the number of teachers. So, I mean, those still drive the numbers, but the other ones kind of go to need. And I think they do a nice job of kind of balancing the allocation. So the first three numbers that I looked at was a nice allocation around the county. But I do have to factor in the special ed and then get the numbers for the public school academies.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, is it possible for us to just get the allocation numbers whenever the administration comes up with those?
Certainly, and I imagine that the oversight committee would look at those too. So, yep, we will make sure that happens. Mm-hmm. Okay. Commissioner Taub for second time.
Thank you. Hillary, I have a question for you. This only includes public and charter schools, is that correct? No private or parochial schools?
Correct.
But we did include them in one of our school grants, didn't we?
No,
What?
I don't, no.
Commissioner,
I think we did it for the water fountains.
Commissioner Taub is referencing the availability of school-age children. I believe it was the Beaumont program, just that they could call the number.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you. Commissioner Loops,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Cobb,
Yes.
Wypert,
Yes.
Kuhn,
Yes.
Woodward,
Yes.
Gershenson,
Yes.
Biz,
Before I vote, can I get an agreement with the chair to put this on the regular agenda?
Yes.
Okay, then yes.
Zach,
Yes.
Jackson.
Yeah.
11-0, recommendation passes.
All right, that's sufficient everybody in the affirmative. It'll be recommended to the full board. Thank you, everybody. It's like those are all the items on the agenda. We had one thing that got left off this agenda that was on a previous version was an update on the school nurses program. And so I believe we got Kathy Fordley that is on and is ready. So Kathy, are you still there? And I know that some people might have to leave, but I want to create the opportunity to give an update how our school nurses, when our ramp up is, how it's being used, how are they being used. I think there were some questions that some commissioners had. So, Kathy?
Thank you. Normally Calandra would be here today to provide this update, but I'm happy to fill in for her as she's not in the office. So what I'm hearing from our nursing supervisors, they're reporting that things are going very well with the first startup week in school and with the private schools. Things are going really well with the COVID program during the school reopenings and also in preparation for future openings in the other schools. The administrators have been highly receptive to the support that the COVID-19 nurses are providing. Introductory meetings have occurred with all of the superintendents, and by the end of this week, there will have been additional meetings and walkthrough assessments will have taken place in 21 out of 28 districts. The walkthrough assessments are very important. It is also considered partially a training opportunity as the COVID nurses walks through with possibly the superintendent, school administrators, through a school that they choose as sort of their model for the strategies they're going to take in all their schools. And they walk through and they look at a number of things, including the health screening stations, appropriate signage in hallways, classrooms, entries and exits. Also looking at the sick rooms or the quarantine area, making sure they have appropriate PPE in that area. They're looking at classrooms in terms of their cleaning and disinfecting protocols that they have in place. Barriers for individualized instruction versus entire classrooms, cohorting capabilities. They're going to be looking at things like onboarding and offboarding students from into the school, out of the school, on and off buses, that kind of thing. They've created a checklist that's been developed to document, just to make sure that they have the proper things in place with facial coverings, so social distancing and hand washing, scheduled hand washing every 2 to 3 hours. There's been a few positive cases that have been reported in the schools in the past week, and school administrators are quickly learning to connect immediately with a clinical disease unit if they receive a report before the health division does. Often that happens because the health division often receives their first report and test results, but a school might get a call from a parent who's already been notified by the tester. So they need to connect immediately with the clinical disease unit rather than the COVID nurse. But our COVID nurses have been really great boots on the ground to really support and to assure that correct procedures for reporting are being followed in the schools. Currently, we have 60 nurses that have been through orientation and the onboarding process, and they are actively working in the schools today. 3 more nurses are in the process, various stages of onboarding. 6 more are being offered positions, and we have had 3 that have been offered that have been declined because they've secured permanent positions elsewhere. If the last 6 that we're offering positions to, we will have 69 COVID nurses. Our supervisors are telling us that they think that is a really good number for this program. All private and charter schools have been assigned COVID nurses as well as received a letter of introduction. We have had or have scheduled virtual meetings for over a third of those schools. They have future plannings, future trainings that are being planned and scheduled in place. First of all, they want to have training for all the front office staff. That's really important to make sure that they have the Oakland County Toolkit and they're able to navigate our website. And we want to review with them the process for reporting positive cases because there are forms that they need to utilize for that. We also are working with superintendents to implement virtual training for all the schools. Our COVID nurses will be training such things as understanding COVID-19, hand washing, and making sure that it's age and grade appropriate, donning and doffing of PPE, the correct procedures, proper handling and storage of masks and facial coverings. There's a lot of misconception about that out in the community, so we're excited to get that done. PPE checklists and requirements for special education and additional education as it comes up when we learn what our schools are needing as the nurses continue to engage with them. We will be developing more trainings that will be appropriate for our school, both for the students as well as teachers and administrators will be open. We'll be having separate trainings for all of those. So unless there's additional questions, that's my report.
Thank you. There are a couple questions. We had Commissioner Taub first.
Yes, thank you. Kathy, I wasn't getting everything you were saying. It was kind of scratchy, the reception. But did you say that there are nurses in private and parochial schools as well?
Oh, yes. All of the privates have been assigned COVID nurses, yes.
And what about any other things? Like, are they getting masks or gloves or sanitizer or anything of that sort?
Yeah, there's a plan in place for that. And Rudy's, I think, on the call. Rudy, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So Tom Hardesty has been our point person for all PPE requests. And so we've communicated with all schools in terms of the appropriate way to contact the county for the request. And so we've been getting a number of requests for PPE. And so Tom is the guy that fulfills all those requests. But we have made ourselves available.
Thank you. Kathy, can I follow up with you, please?
Sure.
You said there were 6 cases in varying schools or just private?
No, there's been a few cases reported, and you know that has to go through a process. Just because it's reported doesn't really mean it's a case. So I can't report on the exact number, but I know it's a few. I think the number is well under 10, and it's in the privates. And there have been a couple of cases that have been associated with schools. Maybe they're participating in team sport drills, prior to school startup kind of thing. But that's about the extent of it for right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Taub. Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that breakdown, Kathy. That's very, very, very helpful. As we move forward, will these nurses be spending time on site throughout the week? Is it going to be Zoom, or is it up for the discretion of the actual school district?
Yeah, so we'll be doing a lot of work virtually, but definitely they'll be spending time in schools, especially as issues start to arise and they're answering questions. They may need to go on site to view how things have been set up in various areas. So they'll be responding to principals across the district where they've been assigned and will absolutely be available to be on site.
So thank you. Just to clarify, is it up to the schools to determine whether or not these nurses are on site? Or is it the health department who determines the on-site time the nurses spend with these schools?
I think it's a little bit of both. Sorry, Rudy, were you going to say something?
No, I was just I think you're on the right track. Please go.
Okay, so I think it's a little bit of both. First of all, I know there's questions coming in from principals and teachers. And the nurse may decide that the best thing she can do is go on site to work through whatever those questions are. And I think that we're seeing already that we need you to take a look at this and you perhaps provide us some recommendations, guidance on how to set this up or that up. But the other thing is when our nurses have the time and they're not responding to something, we expect them to be making their rounds and making appointments and going and talking to the various administrators in different schools. Sometimes they may not even be fully aware of all the things that COVID nurse can bring to them. So that's that nurse's opportunity to go out in the field and say, hey, I have this information for you today, or, you know, I'm here to talk to you about this or that. These are things that as our COVID nurses get back together, as supervisors pull them back together and see how it's going, they're going to learn from the various issues that are arising, what they need to be maybe more proactive about to address as time goes on. So they're very capable of providing direction and guidance virtually, but they also know that they're expected to be out there doing some face-to-face and seeing what else they can do when they're on site.
Excellent, thank you.
And Kathy, I mean, to that point, maybe I think being on site, I think this question's come up because I've gotten mixed signals that some people were telling me that, oh, our nurses aren't actually going to see the schools, which I quickly that doesn't make any sense.
No.
They have to be able to be in the school. They have to see the flow of where the kids move. They have to be in order to advise for safety. I see Richard says, I'll get you in a second. They have to, they have to be on site to observe that. We've got some schools that are open, and they're doing either a hybrid or, I don't think it can be 100% open. But I mean, to the extent that we can observe that and learn best practices so that when, hopefully sooner rather than later, more schools open, that they can bring that expertise there, obviously to be on hand to respond to their individual schools. But what the two things that I want to make certain, every superintendent knows who are the public health nurses assigned to them.
Yes.
And then I hope also maybe the respective school leaders know that, because I think that information, I think sometimes gets lost in translation. We got to make certain that we're proactive in communicating that. And then lastly, to the public, I think when we talk about this, I think people have a notion of the school nurse that everyone used to Miss Cratchit, they used to be at the hall and you stubbed your nail or knee or whatever, and you got your Band-Aids. This is different. These nurses are designed specifically to help guide, structure, and provide the support to make certain that things are open safely. Things that you mentioned, make sure that kids are washing their hands every few hours. They add additional things. So it's a little bit different. I think to the extent that we can actively communicate, that makes a lot of sense.
Hey, I'll share this. I'm going to share this with Dave, Kathy. I think that, I made sure, I double back with Calandra to make sure that every superintendent received an email and a phone call. And I think that she has done a good job of making sure that every superintendent, every district nurse has sent that notice and email to those supers, and then also follow up with a phone call. So I feel very comfortable about the process that everybody's been contacted. One of the things I'll just kind of share with Calandra is that sometimes emails get lost, especially when you're a superintendent and you're probably receiving, 70 to 100 emails a day. So that's where the personal phone call kind of comes into play. And then just on top of, what you're saying in terms of, the messaging, I think that's absolutely critical, and that's why I wanted to make sure that there was a meeting between the district nurse and the superintendent or the COVID designee, for the district, just to kind of make sure that we're all kind of, hearing the same thing at the same time and setting the expectations on the front end, which, I think that's what's being done now. I think there's still a few more school districts there that we still have to actually get to in terms of setting up the meeting.
Good. I would also just recommend that someone from the school board probably participate. I think that we got over communicate to the extent possible. So to the extent that I don't know, the president or a designee of the school board, so that everyone's operating from the same bit of information is incredibly helpful. So,
all right, we'll do.
Glad to hear. Commissioner Spiz had his hand up.
Yeah, I would just like to confirm that the nurses are visiting the schools, since I happen to have 2 of the school districts in my district that are actually open for school right now with students on site, both in Oxford and Brandon Township. So they did come out, they did walk through it with everybody on site and make sure everything was in place as required.
Right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Zach.
So is the Beaumont Nurse on Call hotline live? And do schools know about it? It's not.
Not yet. Right now, we're waiting for the last little touches from risk management, I think on both sides. The contract's written, it's just waiting for maybe some tweaks and some language there. Also, Beaumont was waiting for IT to provide their IT to provide a phone number. The flyer's made. We're hoping everything's in place by tomorrow when we have a meeting with the superintendents, so we can pass off the flyer so that they're ready to go next week.
Okay, that's what I just want to make sure that is communicated throughout the school systems as well. I am aware that one of the Jewish day schools has a public health nurse. And so are they coordinating? Are they being funded through the county or through other CARES dollars? And are they working with the county health department?
Yeah, so when a school has a private or their own nurse, the COVID nursing program is communicating with them, including them in. They've been invited to trainings, whatever. We totally want to walk in lockstep with the nurse that's already familiar with the district, and any support we can provide that nurse in terms of COVID information, best practices. That is what we're here for.
Okay, so most likely if it's a private school, they have other funding. It's a new position that they didn't have before. And so they would have gotten either private funding or maybe federal funding or something for that position.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you, that's it.
Any other questions for Kathy
Yes.
on these?
Yes.
Janet? Go ahead, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Quickly, I know that we are promoting getting the traditional flu shot more than ever. Actually, the governor got one on TV last week, and I just wanted to know, are we considering offering the traditional flu shot in our schools through our health department on site?
So we're currently in the planning stages. The health departments do not yet have flu shots on site. It always appears in the pharmacies first and places like that. We are expecting flu shots end of September, beginning of October. And right now we're looking at the most efficient way that we can give flu shots in the community. And of course, identifying our most vulnerable populations to really get that in the arms of those people first. We definitely want to see children receiving flu shots, but as to the mechanics of that or the logistics of that, it has not been formalized as of yet.
Okay, well, I'm glad it's being considered. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for being with us today. I apologize. You would have been normally top of the agenda and it got accidentally dropped off. And so I really appreciate it. And to you too, Deputy Executive Hobbs. So thank you both for being here and look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And seeing no further business to come before us, I will declare the meeting adjourned. And we'll see everybody for sure no later than tomorrow